Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott skill
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you? Hello, our darling audience. This is the Lost Signals, reviewing literature. I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with Scott Thilla.
I prefer a good pork chop.
Stephen Amosi.
Hello, darling.
And Christopher Morgan.
I'll take the salmon.
And today we are doing Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald
Dahl.
So today's episode was supposed to be something different, but at last minute we decided to switch. I looked up a list of some of the better short stories out there, and this was number one. I had never read Dahl before.
Really?
I'm familiar with him from The Chocolate Factory and other works similarly, but I had never read anything by him. And so this is my first experience with him. Scott, would you
Very
like to
different from his kids' stuff. I'll tell you that much.
I was going to definitely expand
but
upon that.
just as delicious.
Yeah.
So, Scott, would you like to have the funny log line here?
I would. Yeah, this is by far the worst episode of The Honeymooners that I have ever read. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Mussy, tell us the plot of Lambs to the Slaughter.
Sure. So a woman is at home waiting for her husband to come home from work. He comes home from work, says a bunch of stuff to her, which we are led to assume means that he's leaving her.
Yes. Very heavily implied.
I don't think it's ever actually said that, but she feels like her life is over, takes the leg of lamb out of the freezer, beats him to death with it, and then proceeds to cook it and feed it to the policemen that were his co-workers while they try to figure out what the instrument of her husband's death was.
Surely the murder weapon must be somewhere.
Yeah.
So they say something.
Yes, right under their noses. It's got to be right under our noses.
Yeah.
And yes, the end is like just her delighting in having
darkly smiling about it.
That they are eating the murder instrument and have no idea. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a pretty short story. Yeah. Tight plot. I think it works pretty well. It's annoyed. It's kind of annoying at the beginning, like just the description of their what the wife Mary assumes is like wedded bliss or like her vision of it, but that's all there to set up the dark turn that's about to happen, of course. And I think it's done pretty well. I'd probably give it a 2. It's a pretty short, maybe could be convinced of a 3 if anybody has a strong argument, but I think a 2 is about where it's at.
I mean, I'll pretty much agree with it. So I have read a bunch of Dahl, but just not this one. And it's very much in keeping in his style and sort of thematic. Like, it's almost kind of like, I feel like you could lump, just a quick tangent, but like him, maybe like Hemingway, to like a couple of like American authors from the era, like somewhat share a similar style and sort of tone. And I feel like he's one of them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very, I would say, exemplary of his stuff. And you're right, it's very short. It's like 4K words, or a little less even. And it works like for what it is. I think a strong 2 is about right. I'm not opposed to a 3. I just don't think it maybe like deserves or gets there enough, but could be convinced. But I'm looking at same thing, Steve-O, what you said. So yeah, what do you guys think?
I've only read one Roald Dahl story before this, and it turns out to be this one. My third grade
read the same one twice.
My third grade teacher, like looking back, Mrs. Kelly, who like is definitely one of the best teachers, really challenged us. Some of the stories we read, looking back at it, I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Third grade, you read this?
In third grade, I was 8 years old when I read this, and there's a couple other things that we read that I look back on and be like, Jesus Christ, you gave a bunch of 8-year-olds this to read? Awesome.
You probably hadn't read it. She was just like, "Oh, it's Roald Dahl. It's gonna be fine."
No, when Ian suggested this title, I'm like, I think I know what this is, and like I said, the first sentence, I'm like, props to Mrs. Kelly. So yeah, I'll probably give this a 2. It is a short story. It's not a fault of the story of itself. It's just by nature of the narrative, it really loans itself to it too. Unless anybody can convince me.
I'm not going to try to convince you, but I'm impressed by the structure of this because in the first act of it, it's establishing establishing our preconceptions for how the police are later going to look at her as a timid housewife.
It's almost like, I'm sorry,
That is a good point. That is a very good point.
She bludgeons her husband to death with a leg of lamb, and then actually gets out of that with the preconceived notions of the dutiful house, the hostess thing. Mm-hmm. So overall, but perhaps it's more of a thematic aspect than necessarily a narrative one. But I think it's probably worth it too. Like it's.
I do also love how she convinces herself that she is like surprised about her husband being dead when she comes back from the grocer and things like that. Like it goes really strongly into her mental state in very few words, and I thought that was pretty impressive as well.
Also, I like the fact that we see her mental state into how to get away with it, and she successfully does. Mm-hmm. Probably I'll give it a 2 anyway. That's 2s all around. Chris, I think. Yes, Chris, themes.
Well, as a child of divorce, my whole thing is, don't fuck around on your wife, because I'm assuming that's why he's left her.
Mm-hmm. You can't
but I mean, she's 6 months pregnant. I mean, if you're thinking, you're going to leave somebody prior to 6 months, no glove, no love, baby. So I'm assuming he was an adulterer.
Or he's freaking out about having a kid and is just like, I can't deal with it.
That's completely understandable. But, there is that Orange is the New Black thing where you just take off and bye-bye. But they're already married and they have a kid. And he's just like, I'll give you money and everything like that. I don't really know how to put the theme into words more than what you said, that, he was a shithead and she just kind of snapped. And she was incredibly I don't want to go too much in Protagonist, but I really liked the way her thought process to all this. It was really intentionally, unintentionally thought out how she's going to go about this thing. So I'm really not sure what an exact theme is per se, but there's a lot of little things that I think make up a whole. So I'm going to give it a 1. Like I said, I can't think of one overarching thing, but taking it apart, I can appreciate every little thing that went into it.
Yeah, I get what you mean. So it's almost like this is probably a story that you like quite a bit because it's a slice of life story and you enjoy that stuff. I think
I do. On a weird day.
But you know what I mean? Like it's not like it's magical realism or anything. It's a real situation that could plausibly happen, if you will. Crime of passion pretty much is what happened in it. And yeah, excuse me, Chris, I think you're right. Like, while you might not be able to quite put your finger on it, like it does resonate. It has like something to say, even if it's just that sort of. But I think there's enough nuance there that you can like delve into it a bit. And I think that is the reason I'm going to give it a 1, if not for anything specifically. But I think you guys can probably pick out some specifics. So with that, why don't you do it?
I actually think this is a fairly pro-female, especially in the 50s when it came out. She is smarter than all the men, and she gets away with it because of their preconceptions going in. And I think that's partly the proof of intention is the setup to this, as I mentioned earlier, where it makes us think of her as this housewife who is trapped in her she defines her life by her husband and a lot of the early things. I was actually kind of taken aback by that initially because I don't like that, except that she ends up killing him, which was surprising me, not knowing anything about this going in, and then successfully finagles her way to avoid all suspicion. In fact, detailing out, I'm going to establish an alibi. I'm going to establish an alibi doing what the expected aspect of a housewife is. I'm going to go get food for my husband. Oh, my husband wants cheesecake tonight. Yes, that's what is fair. So overall, I actually think that this is a fairly progressive look at murdering your husband with a leg of lamb.
That's Very good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that seemingly Dahl was on the vanguard of a lot of that type of stuff in a lot of his works. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's kind of one of the big takeaways is like you get to see this transformation from like doting housewife to like somebody who's good at murder and getting away with it. And like it's such a quick transformation, it's such a quick transition that I don't know. I think it's
because it's like the story is quite short.
It's a good story in terms of that, and you know it's written well. I think this was like typed off of a book by somebody, the version that I read anyway, because there are a bunch of like spelling mistakes and like errors.
And all, but yeah, whatever.
I was like, somebody just typed this out or something. But you still knew what was going on, and it was a fairly well done theme in terms of that, like just the her finding her power, I guess, you know, whether it's for evil in this case, like for murder in this case or whatever. But I did enjoy that as part of the story, and I think that's well more than enough to give themes a 1 for me.
Actually, as interesting subnote to this, this is anecdotal. I don't have any necessarily proof aside from one thing I saw on it. But Ian Fleming supposedly gave the idea to Dahl about
ironic,
which is considering Bond is one of the least progressive characters of all time. That it's fitting that Ian Fleming's idea was used to create such an with such thematics. Anyway, so that's ones all around.
Yep.
All right, Scott, talk about the antagonist here.
So maybe it is kind of going to what you guys just said, like a more nebulous one, the sexism and the assumptions of the era, and even continuing to this current day. Now, I don't think like necessarily. I think Patrick was the husband's name. The thing was Patrick and Mary or Martha, but
Mary.
He was barely. Of course, he's barely in it because she murders him in the first like opening pages. So like, and yeah, so I think that means like it is the like her feeling trapped again, and this has come up like recently as well in a couple of things we did going back a month or so. But yeah, feeling trapped by her situation and sort of at least to some degree getting abandoned, like her husband is going to leave her for whatever reason it may be, right? And that she sort of snaps with it. And then she realized like, well, I can probably get away with this if I do this and that. And she does. So I think it is the antagonism of like just being in a situation that you're uncomfortable with, or that turns uncomfortable, that turns against you, and what you do within that. So I think that's also pretty strong because it's so like broadly applicable that I think when done well, which I think it is in here in this story, I think that's a 1 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I don't think it's really her husband is the antagonist. He provides the antagonism, I guess, but it is like
impetus. Yeah, he's the catalyst, as we like to say.
Although, I don't know. Maybe I would call him somewhat of an antagonist just because he specifically is the reason that she performs this act. It's not like the overall sexism is what's happening now. He cheated on her, or at least is like leaving her, and that's the reason that she decides to murder a man, namely him. But she, like, if anything, you know, she's certainly not a hero of this either. Maybe perhaps an anti-hero of like a feminist anti-hero or something. But yeah, so I think that it does well in terms of both of those antagonists. You do feel her. I feel like she feels more free at the end of the movie the story than she does at the beginning. Obviously, that's definitely what they're going for, but she has kind of like freed herself of the chains of the antagonism that she feels throughout the entire thing. Good.
She, in a sense, is a precursor to like Thelma and Louise and other works like that.
Things within that same.
Yeah,
that's a really good analogy. Yeah. Yeah.
Chris?
I agree with you guys. I'm gonna give antagonist 1.
Yeah, I didn't know I was going to go give it going in, but I think you guys convinced me to. So 1's all around.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I think it works.
All right. Protagonist. Mary.
I believe it's Mary.
Yeah, Mary Maloney.
Interesting enough, she's not a Mary Sue. Although everything does go right for her, but it's based off of both desperation, shock, and cleverness. I think she's very intriguing to see her state of mind, especially the arc that she goes through in such a condensed story. We almost the fact that she has no agency to begin with. She defines herself by her husband, about being the mother of the child, the housewife for their home, and when that identity is threatened, she reacts violently. I think she's a fascinating character. I don't know enough about this era's other writing to state or whether how influential this work was, but again, even though I had to compare it to like Thelma and Louise, which came 70s, I believe, when that came, or
80s.
Yeah.
Oh, 80s.
A little later than that, at least. Yeah.
That was considered revolutionary work, and this was in the 50s and hitting the same themes. So, yeah, I have to give her credit for that.
No, I agree. I think she's a very complex character, which, like we said, it's pretty impressive that he's able to pack a lot of that in to such a short span of a story. And yeah, she has dynamicism to her, and her motivations. At least you understand sort of why she did what she did, even if, like I said, it was in the heat of the moment. But then she figures out basically what to do about it and to not get caught, and doesn't. So, yeah, I also going to give her character, a large amount of credit and give it a 1.
I like the point Ian brought up about how she creates her own agency, for lack of painting with a broad stroke. She's a very effective character. I'm giving her a 1, and thinking back on this and the other stuff Mrs. Kelly gave us, it really says a lot about this teacher I had in third grade
teacher, I suppose. Yes,
I think she was trying to mess you guys up, but yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I like this character, especially as the main character of this story. Has this great arc, and it's not easy to do that in less than 4,000 words.
He's a good writer.
Strong 1 for all the reasons that you guys mentioned.
Yep.
All right, Stephen, keep talking about supporting characters.
Well, I guess it's all the bumbling police and the grocer Sam.
I thought you said that was your favorite character.
Who she used as an alibi. I mean, none of them have much going on. They're not really the point of the story. The police are interesting because she just kind of convinces them to drink and eat the murder weapon, throughout the course of the evening as they're trying to figure out who killed their buddy, basically. And I think that they mostly just give her good little one-liners and lines. That's what they're kind of there for. At the end, says personally, I think the murder weapon's right on the premises, probably right under our noses, and then she just starts to laugh or whatever. But I don't know whether to give them a 1. They're not very interesting. They're just there for her to be for her to play off of and to work off of and to work, as they're kind of the target of her con per se. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. So I mean, we said this before too, and again, it's sort of by nature, by design in a story like this, where they're more plot devices than they are characters, or at least again, they're more relevant as compared to her as an actual character versus being characters unto themselves. So I think it's probably for me a default 0 because of that. Again, it's not bad, it's not shittily designed, it's just that's the point of it, and they're not the focal point. So that's how I view it, and there's precedent for it, so I'm invoking that really, and that's why I'm giving it a 0 on this front at least.
Yeah, I was back and forth on this too because on the one hand, without them you could not, because of them you were able to externalize what was internal, meaning that she had all this thing going on, knowing she'd have to deal with this. So the having them there as the manifestations, kind of like the payoff to what's going on within her internally. I actually might be. I think I've just talked myself into maybe giving it a 1, because without them, you would not have an exemplification of her agency. They may not be characters in and of themselves, but they serve to elevate the protagonist.
Yeah, like I said, they're a plot device. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's why I'm giving them 0. But I can see, like, yes, they're important.
They're also a thematic device.
Yeah.
Chris, I think that's actually an interesting point. I was very on the fence going in. But in a sense, it's this, she kills her husband, but she defeats her husband in besting his friends who are the police. That is the culmination, not only the action, but she took the action. Now she took the step forward of besting that masculine society. So I think, Chris, you might have pushed me over to a 1 on this.
That's
I was going to go in with a 0 too. So.
That's interesting that you say it that way. That might put me onto a 0 because you're absolutely right. But that doesn't like, I look at that and I'm like, oh, that's not a supporting. They're no longer supporting characters. They are an extension of the antagonist, really, in terms of that. So like, I might give this a 0 because there aren't really any other than Sam the grocer.
Yeah. It's funny. I think we all agree on that point. Just like that means I think we have to give it a 0.
Defeating them defeats her husband. Then that's just an extension of like what the antagonist is in general. Yeah.
No, that's an incredibly good point. I'm switching my score for that. Well,
Yeah, switch my score back. No, well, because I was starting with a 0, and the more I thought about it, the more I talked myself
Do you
into
agree
one.
with my correct assessment on the onset?
But yeah,
Yeah, I got you.
see, that was really good. We all layered it, and Steve-O brought it,
Right on.
brought it all home.
crashing down.
All right, Chris. Dialogue.
Dialogue, darling.
The dialogue was there. What the thing is, the internal monologue said a lot, and the bumbling detectives kind of like obtuse style, unknowing dialogue that they were actually under our noses. I don't know. I'm kind of leaning on a 0 for this one. I think it was just there.
Yeah.
It was neither. It seemed to be procedural and then serve to the protagonist. But I think she's a strong enough character that
Yeah,
So I'm going to give it a 0.
I agree. I'll basically add on to it, like follow suit that yes, again, it's somewhat by design, or at least not the fault of the story, but it's not also the point of the story, at least the actual dialogue. And whatever is there is just like sort of fills in the gaps and gets it from a point A to point B, but it's not really like, again, the central focus point. So softer, that's how I'm looking at it.
I disagree with that because a lot of the dialogue is about decorum. A lot of the dialogue is about the cops say, like, you hear they'll speak to her one way, she'll overhear them talking in a different sense. The relationship wife about keeping up the idea, and then it's also about what lies beneath that decorum. So, like, yes, it's in service to thematics, but I think that it's chosen to have a point just beyond just giving information.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that, Ian. I think that, yes, you're right. This dialogue is very simplistic and like seems like workaday, but it is like all
But
about
it's not like a hidden layer
what front you put on during which situation. And like, I think that it does really good about making subtle changes in the way that people speak when they are in one situation or in another situation. Like you said, like the cops speak to her one way and then she overhears them in the kitchen speaking to each other a different way. Or, that's a big one, but like her own internal monologue itself changes throughout the story and the way that she's thinking. When her situation changes, she starts talking kind of differently to herself anyway. And I don't know if we're going to count that as dialogue per se, but I tend to agree. I like the dialogue in this because it's very simple and because it doesn't try to. It's not like the characters are putting on airs or anything, but it does have those subtle changes in between different conversations, and it's a really good point that you bring up there.
Yeah, I think that's because of that angle, like because there's a layer beneath what it says on the surface, and in service to thematics and what we said earlier, that might switch me to a 1.
I agree with you. I'm just trying to decide if that's going to go into style or dialogue.
Yeah. I think it is a bit of style, but
put it in style, yeah.
Because I think it flows into both now that they've talked it out, Chris, for me. So
yeah, I'm. What did you give it? A softer one?
Yep. I'm giving it 1 at the end of the day, but I was coming in with.
All right. Yeah, I agree with you, Scott.
All right. It's a very valid point.
Well, Scott, keep talking about style.
Up style, yeah, I'm giving it a 1. It's even like without that, like what we just said, like the angle we took, I would give it a 1 anyways because Dahl has always been a very good writer, at least I think, and he's famously known because of it. I would say he's still read to this day, and yeah, it works like you said, Steve. The inner like what you just said, I think is also evidence, like a good reason to add credit to style because he does it on both fronts, both internally to the main character and her actual interactions with the other characters. Yeah. And with that layer stapled beneath it, I think that makes it work. That elevates it a bit as well. So I'm giving style a very solid 1 because of all that, and it's just well written as well. Like it's again impressive, like we said, that he compresses all this stuff into a short length without really losing it and having a bit of nuance there. So
yeah, the density of this is very impressive. I have a quick question for you guys. Do you think that bludgeoning someone with a leg of lamb tenderizes it more?
I can absolutely say for certain.
Well, it's frozen.
I guess you'd have to unfreeze it first, and then
probably not because it's frozen. But
it might help a little bit.
I'm going to say this about the style. This is not the first time the story has come up in my own mind. I mean, this story has stuck with me since 1978. I've always liked it. I recognized it pretty much. I was almost positive when I saw the title. As soon as I read that first line, there is nothing that I could add more to style than say, yeah, 42 years later, this story left an impression so much. And you have such a clear visual of how everything is, it's definitely getting a 1.
Yeah, I agree. It's stylistically strong. I think you guys have said pretty much everything that I was going to say about it. Just a strongly written and well done story. So, yep, 1 to style.
All right, and it's on to me with recommendation. Yeah, I mean it's quick, it's interesting enough. I think it's a good introduction to Dahl if you haven't read him before. And a loss of innocence, lambs to the slaughter are always a great kind of thematic. So sure, why not?
I just thought of another one, so I'm going to recommend it. Yes, for sure. It's got that American Gothic feel to it, a la like Flannery O'Connor. That's another one who I meant to mention earlier. But yeah, so like you said, it's a quick read, it's a good read, and it still stands. So
hey, you gotta have a good time reading this little short story over here. Just read it. I don't know why I went to this accent.
Oh, yeah, what relevance was that?
This guy.
Yeah.
Hey, like a lamb, read the story.
Hey, darling.
Support your local butchers.
Yeah, I highly recommend it for all the reasons I just said before.
All right. Well, that was a very anticlimactic recommendation. Sure, why not?
I already said why I recommended it.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is a timeless tale of wanting to kill your spouse. Overall, we give it an 8.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's pretty
plot. I mean, like it's good. It's good, and no supporting characters because everyone is the villain in this.
They're extensions of other questions.
Yeah. So that's an 8 overall.
Strong. I think it's earned it.
I'm Jonathan Manzer. I'm going to go enjoy some lamb myself here with Scott Thurlow.
And I'm going to beat some people to death with that lamb.
after it's cooked, though. Stephen Ramosi
And I've got to go on the lamb because I just murdered somebody with the lamb.
and Christopher Morgan, end us with a pun.
Mint jelly.
It's not a pun.
Eat with lamb.
Perfect ending.
I guess we used up all the puns in the previous episode, so
Have a good night, everyone.
thanks for joining us. Mint jelly. Catch you next time.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Ramosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.